how the people are doing. So, man, it's been a while since I made a video, but it is bloody good to be back. Let's just say sometimes I can get a little too busy and things get out of hand. But, well, we're back, and we are back with the Vivo X200 Pro more than anything else. Now that is very important because let's just say Vivo has transitioned from using 24 or 23mm 1x main cameras to 35mm. Why is this important? Well, we'll delve into a lot of the details there. There are advantages and disadvantages to this whole thing. And it's very interesting, the situation. That's the best way to put it right now before we delve into the details. But let's just say that because Vivo has transitioned to this new format of main cameras, there are a few concerns that I have. But more than anything else, what I have noticed in general is that these photography comparisons that I make, they keep getting longer and longer, and in my effort to maintain as much detail as I possibly can, it just gets a little out of hand, you know? So you may have noticed at this point that this particular photography comparison is a little different. What we have here are regular daylight shots, HDR, we've got our zoom shots, high res, night mode, all that good stuff, but human subjects will be handled separately. I'll make that video very soon. It's mostly in interest of not making a video way too long to the point that it just bores most people, and also so that I can get more videos out faster. Because taking human subjects, which is I'm the only human subject in my photos, so taking my photos can be a little bit problematic in terms of scheduling, but taking regular shots, not so much. So I can get this video out much faster than if I had decided to include human subjects. It would have been at least a week longer just to produce the whole thing. So with that out the way, and that's why this one won't have human subjects, don't bitch about it in the comments, there's no point. The video will be out soon, which specifically focuses on human subjects, selfies, portraits, regular photos, all that good stuff. So with that said, finally, let us get started. Alright, so as usual, we are starting off with our color profiles. So here's the thing. The X200 Ultra does give you more options. You get the vivid mode, which is similar to like a vibrant but slightly less contrast, maybe a little bit more saturation. And then you have just natural colors, which is, I think, by far, it is one of the most natural color profiles that you can have. The X200 Pro, the X200 Ultra, both of these phones have some of the most natural colors that you can have. Now, on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, you have obviously Leica Authentic. Now, Leica Authentic is by far one of my all-time favorite color profiles. There's really nothing else that can strike that beautiful balance between style and natural color tones, as well as Leica Authentic. On the other hand, we also have textured mode, which, yes, it's very good, but it's kind of finicky and it does not have nearly as natural color tones as we would normally expect, especially when compared to Leica Authentic, which does give you much more natural color tones and its overall consistency is higher. Now naturally, the choice is entirely yours which one you want to use. I'm not recommending you use this or that over the other. This is just what I like to use, and this is what we will continue to use over the comparison. If you want to try something else, by all means, and also you have plenty of samples to check it out. Now, with that said, let us also address the other elephant in the room, 35mm. As you can probably tell, we don't have nearly as wide a field of view as we do on the Xiaomi. So the X200 Ultra with the 35mm is essentially a 1.5x crop optical zoom that we have, as opposed to the regular 1x shots that we are very much used to at this point. 35mm does not have distortion, which is an advantage. But there are cons here. You see, having 35mm means that you don't have as much flexibility with your field of view. Of course, it does depend on your use cases, but you know, I can't help but feel concerned about the limited flexibility when it comes to the main camera. So look, in a nutshell, the reason I'm even talking about this entire thing is because I don't know how people are gonna feel about this. So just let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Do you feel that this is gonna constrict your usability, your flexibility with your cameras, the 35mm that is, or is this not something that you're going to bother with? Is it just nice to not have any distortion? Just let me know. That's the best way to put it. Now, when it comes to dynamic range, without any surprise whatsoever, I can tell you that the X200 Ultra is better because yeah, obviously it is. It's always been one of the best when it comes to dynamic range. The X200 Pro was stunning to say the least, and the same goes for the X200 Ultra, especially compared to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, which in general is not the best when it comes to backlit shots and stuff like that. Well, the X200 is going to pull ahead, as you would have expected. Now moving right along, we have the ultra-wide camera, And yes, this time I included the color profiles for the ultrawide as well, in case you were wondering, in case you saw something that made you want to use a different color profile for the ultrawide camera. By all means, I think the differences are not nearly as pronounced as one might expect switching from the main to the ultrawide camera. For the most part, the color profiles act exactly as you would expect them to. You get a stunning result with the ultrawide on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra using like authentic, and absolutely love the look of that. And if you want natural colors, once again, that's natural colors is the way to go. Although I must say, textured mode does look really nice and really close to how the Xiaomi 15 Ultra looks, with like authentic in this particular case at least. But having said that, this particular shot, see, most of these shots are in very, very challenging lighting, as you can probably tell. None of these were particularly well lit or evenly lit is the best way to put it. The X200 Ultra it's natural in its color tones, but I do feel like it's kind of underexposed and doesn't really look as nice and bright and high contrast as I would like it to be. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra is going the opposite direction. It is way too high contrast, got way too much of the yellow going on, which is unnatural of course. And well, it's interesting to see both these phones struggling in completely different ways in these kinds of situations, and that's usually how things go. So just for me personally, it can sometimes be a big deal. Now in certain cases, obviously, we noticed this previously as well, the X200 Ultra can just weirdly underexpose and give you a very flat looking image, as opposed to the Xiaomi, which in this case I think this is just absolute perfection. I could not have asked for a better image. Like, if I took a raw image and then edited it, it might just look exactly like the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is doing right now. This is beautiful stuff. It's not blowing out highlights, it's just lifting them up to the cusp of blown out, and it's perfect for me. This is exactly what I would want. Both phones have very unique color profiles, and we have reached a point where even though the lighting can be challenging, sometimes both phones will mess up, but most of the time it really comes down to what exactly it is that you prefer. That's really where the choice entirely comes down to you. There's really nothing I can say about that. But there is something that I just wanted to take a look at. What if you wanted a main camera shot? Like in this particular case, this is a narrow corridor where with the main camera of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, I can just barely fit this particular painting. I could not move any further back, just so you know. There's literally no more space. On the X200 Ultra, however, I had to zoom in from the ultrawide camera to 23mm, and let's just say in this case we are forced to not just use the ultrawide camera, which is by default inferior to the main camera, but we are also forced to zoom in digitally on that, which naturally makes the detail preservation a genuine concern. And well, I don't think anyone expected the X200 Ultra to perform any better than it is right now. There's a 500% crop, and it's beyond obvious that if you really have to take a 23mm shot, you're out of luck, because this is the highest level of quality that you can have. And well, I do have another shot, and in this case the lighting is even better than the previous one. So now it just comes down to how well the X200 Ultra can handle the situation and bring out the details. And look, cropping in, and it's not bad on the X200 Ultra. This is a good amount of detail preservation considering that we're using the ultra-wide camera, but for all intents and purposes it's not even a comparison. And that's where my concern comes in. What if you have to use a 23mm or 24mm shots, otherwise you can't fit your subject in there? Then you're just gonna end up with a subpar image on the X200 Ultra. Is it worth the sacrifice? I honestly don't know what to think, but what I can tell you without a shadow of doubt is that the X200 Ultra can handle dynamic range way better than the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. I doubt it came as a surprise, but let's face it, the overall quality and the dynamic range that you can get, it's really something. Now, to be honest, if you have a simpler situation where it's not as backlit as you would have expected, then sure, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It can still handle itself fairly well, like in this particular case, but let's face it, if it is any more difficult than this, even by a single percentage, it's not going to be as good as the X200 Ultra, plain and simple. And another thing that the X200 Ultra is just blatantly better at is macro photography. Now you might be thinking, well, both of these phones are using the telephoto macros, but the Xiaomi 15 Ultra can get a little bit closer. Sure. However, what the X200 Ultra can do is that it can slap on a 2x sensor crop on top of its telephoto macro. And the telephoto camera, which we'll showcase in just a bit, is by far one of the absolute best on the planet. So that 2x sensor crop is actually going to produce a macro shot, which is also going to be one of the absolute best on the planet. It is this unique combination that allow it to get an edge over just about anything else. And then of course we've got our zoom shot. So 50 millimeters. Now here's the interesting part. The X200 Ultra, I mean, I can tell even right now without zooming in that the X200 Ultra has better detail, but the interesting thing that lets the X200 Ultra have a real leg up, I think, as opposed to just about anything else, is that, yeah, of course, it is going to 50mm focal length using a sensor crop, but it's not a 2x sensor crop specifically, because we're zooming in, once again, from 35mm to 50mm. On the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, it is 23 or 24mm to 50mm, which means there's a proper 2x zoom happening on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Not the case on the X200 Ultra. Now, will there be some amount of sharpening? Well, obviously, there's always some amount of sharpening in there, no matter what. Every single smartphone does it. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra, uniquely enough, doesn't sharpen all that much, but it also produces images with mush all over it, so it's not really doing much to help, now is it? I mean, look, I get that there's sharpening on the X200 Ultra, but as opposed to what we're getting on the Xiaomi, I'd take the X200 any day of the week. It just looks so much nicer. The only way you're really noticing the sharpening is when you're zooming into 500%. But the difference in detail, the sheer amount of detail, is visible even when you don't zoom in at all. And so if you ask me, I think that's quite important. Now, with that said, let's take a look at 3x. Look, 3x is not as good on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. It's fine. It's gotten better as opposed to previous generations, but compared to the 3.7x telephoto on the X200 Ultra, which is by far the best telephoto on the planet, it's not going to compare. And so when we crop into 500%, it's literally case in point. There's no two ways about it. The sheer amount of texture you get on the X200 Ultra is so much higher that it doesn't even feel like the same photograph. Now the Xiaomi does have another trick up its sleeve. You see, it has a 4.3x telephoto, which has a sensor that is just about as good, on paper at least, as what we have on the Vivo. A very high quality, supposedly 200 megapixel sensor, which, well, let's just say it doesn't work out quite as nicely as you would hope. Now, I had honestly expected to have gotten a little bit better with software updates and whatnot, but it seems like the Xiaomi is hopeless. It's never going to give you the same level of detail as the X200 Ultra. Now bear in mind, this particular photograph was in fairly bad lighting. We didn't have a lot of light falling on this painting. So because of that, you can see that there's some artifacts, there's a bit of smearing happening on the X200 Ultra. And despite that, it has so much more texture as opposed to the Xiaomi. But of course, that's not where we stop with that detail preservation. We also have high resolution. And actually, an interesting thing is that the high res is baked into night mode on the X200 Ultra. So we can supposedly take high res night mode shots on the X200 Ultra. I didn't test it out in this particular comparison because I was in a hurry, and I realized that we can do high res night mode way too late, which made me feel really stupid about it. But regardless, this is with the main camera, and let's crop in. And I don't think this is going to surprise anyone that we have a little bit better detail preservation on the X200 Ultra. And I actually see a bit of haloing and sharpening happening on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra as well. If you look at the edges of the calligraphy, it's very obvious that there's a bit of sharpening there. It's actually less of that on the X200 Ultra, so in a way, it's got less artifacting and more detail. Also, the colors are far more natural. That's a good reason for that. The X200 Ultra's night mode and high res have been combined together, and they have complete access to the color profiles, which is says as natural colors. And this particular ultrawide is case in point right here. Like, the colors on the X200 Ultra, they are so obscenely natural. Like, yes, it's a slight bit underexposed, which is something that we have noticed previously as well, but the colors are so perfect, and it's preserved everything so beautifully that there's no two ways about it. Now, when it comes to detail preservation, yes, just as you expect, even with the ultrawide camera, the X200 Ultra is leagues ahead. There's no two ways about it. And then of course 3x. Now this is more of a courtesy than anything else, because we already know that the 3x on the Xiaomi is not going to stack up. Also the colors. The X200 Ultra this time, perfect once again. The Xiaomi is the one that previously it was oversaturating, now it is undersaturating, and it just looks really bland and just horrible. And also, the high res is just as you'd expect, just leagues ahead on the X200 Ultra. Detail preservation in general, I don't think anything at this point can really come close to the X200 Ultra. It's possibly the best that I've used, and that definitely says a lot. Now of course, the Xiaomi does sport that 200 megapixel 4.3x telephoto. As usual, we have perfect colors on the X200 Ultra. It is far better, far nicer to look at as opposed to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Now zooming all the way in with the 50 megapixel mode, I am very sad to report that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra has smearing happening. I don't even know if this is motion blur or not, because it's like the face has a bit of motion blur, but the hair looks fine. I don't know what's going on. It makes no sense to me. But what I can tell you, smearing or not, the X200 Ultra is just, it's like I'm looking at a 480p version of the photograph on the Xiaomi as opposed to 4K on the X200 Ultra. It is such a ridiculously massive difference. There's just no two ways about it. And well, at 200 megapixels, it is the exact same situation. I really expected the Xiaomi to at least give us something better, but there's just nothing going on. The X200 Ultra has actually improved just slightly. I see just a pinch less sharpening and a pinch more realistic detail, like the knife strokes on the face, the textures are popping out beautifully. Honestly, this, once again, as I said, with detail preservation, I sincerely doubt there's any other smartphone that can compete with this one. And I know some people might be thinking, oh, I'm glazing the X200 Ultra, but look, the results speak for themselves. It's way too good at detail preservation. Does it have problems? Sure. It has the whole situation with the 35mm mode and so on and so forth, but detail preservation, there's really nothing else like it. But then what about night mode? See, this is where things are going to be a little bit more interesting, because for the first time ever, on the X200 Ultra, we have full access to all the color profiles. And that means we can have a vivid colors, which will in general give you a slightly brighter result, slightly more saturated result, more saturated night sky, and so on and so forth. If you like it, go for it. I despise that look. I cannot stand a brightened and blue night sky. It makes no sense to me. But we also get Zeiss's natural colors, which gets really close to what the Xiaomi 15 Ultra can do. Now, obviously, there's a focal length disparity going on, but despite that, I would say that the colors look very, very close to what we're getting on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra with Leica Authentic, which, by the way, Leica Authentic is by far easily one of the absolute best when it comes to night mode. There's very few things that can come close in terms of just how well it can represent nighttime. But then of course we also get textured mode on the X200 Ultra, which, let's just say, it does get very, very close to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, but I have noticed some inconsistencies, which is why I would actually recommend to stick with Zeiss's natural colors. It's not going to be as high contrast, as close to the proper nighttime look as we get with Leica Authentic on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, but it is going to be more than good enough, and it is going to give you very nice, very natural results and very consistent results, which is very important when it comes to night mode. The only realistic difference between the two is that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra just has higher contrast, and it just gives you one of the most realistic looking night skies in the history of mankind. There's nothing else like it. But of course we do have the situation happening with the 35mm, which, yes, there's zero distortion in there, which is good. You get a professional focal length, which is good. I'm sure people like me are gonna enjoy it. But the reason I'm once again kind of conflicted is that I don't mind it, but I do know that it limits your flexibility. And at night especially, you absolutely want to use the main camera. You don't want to go to the ultrawide camera, and more than anything else, you don't want to zoom into that. So speaking of, this is exactly what we have. 23mm, which is basically a digital zoom from the ultrawide camera on the X200 Ultra, versus 23mm main camera shot on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. And well, to no one's surprise, yes, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra does give you a more naturally detailed shot as opposed to a more sharpened image that we're getting on the X200 Ultra. However, I must say, at night, with the processing that Vivo has and the lack of sharpening that the Xiaomi has, it's actually much closer than I expected. It's not as good on the X200 Ultra. Simply put, the Vivo is just not going to give you as good results, but it's not honestly as bad as I expected, which, well, it kind of gives me hope that the flexibility issues are not as prevalent or as problematic as I would have expected them to be. Now with the ultrawide cameras, of course, once again, we're using Zeiss's natural colors because it just gives you the most consistent results and the inherently higher contrast that Vivo goes for with the ultrawide camera. These are some of the most natural ultrawide shots that I've had with a Vivo flagship thus far. Honestly, I would be, once again, more than happy to go with this. This is a huge deal in my opinion. I said it before and I'll say it again. These color profiles are one of the most welcome changes that we have ever had, and it's honestly such a huge deal. But then of course, what about zoom at night? So as usual, we're going to 50mm, which is once again not exactly a 2x sensor crop on the Vivo, as opposed to Xiaomi, which is very much a 2x sensor crop. And when it comes to details, once again, the X200 Ultra is the one that has a little bit more processing, a little bit more sharpening. We can only see that when we zoom in all the way to 500%, but the overall detail preservation is way, way higher as opposed to Xiaomi. And then of course we have 3x, which is once again a bit of a courtesy thing because, you know, we have the camera there, why not use it? But in case of night mode, actually, when we crop in, you'll notice that there is a little bit better detail preservation than you would have expected on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. But then what about the 4.3x on the Xiaomi? You see, before we crop in, one thing that I have to take note of here is that the Xiaomi is really messing up our white balance. It's completely neutralizing all of the warmth and removing it, and that's not how it looked. The X200 Ultra with the glorious natural colors is absolutely perfect, no two ways about it. And cropping in all the way, I would say that this may not have been the best possible subject. There was actually a bit of a texture happening on this thing, the M that I took a photo of. Neither of these phones are actually producing that result, which is kind of surprising. I really expected the X200 Ultra to perform better than this, but we do have a 10x shot. And let's just say that this is where Xiaomi once again bared its fangs when it comes to the motion blur problems. Because you see, the X200 Ultra took a 1-second exposure in this particular case with a 10x, and the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, it did not take a long exposure. Apparently it felt like there was enough light, but the surprising thing is, the Xiaomi still ended up with motion blur, which makes no sense. How do you end up with motion blur if you don't take a long exposure? That is pure insanity. I took like 5 different shots and all of them had motion blur in there. I just gave up after a certain amount of time because it's one of these issues with the Xiaomi that makes no sense to me, and I don't even know why it exists. So with that said, we're at the end of this comparison. Man, it has been a while since I've gone this in-depth on a camera comparison. Feels good. Most definitely it does. And yes, we will take a look at human subjects. That's a guarantee. It's going to come out next week. And before that, actually, I have the X200 Pro versus the X200 Ultra comparison. I've already got a few samples ready to go. I'll have to take a few more, but well, it's in the works. Now, more than anything else, what I feel is really just interesting about the X200 Ultra is that 35mm situation. I still don't know if the flexibility hit is going to be good enough or not. It's a situation that I haven't wrapped my head around, is the best way to put it. Now, I've been thinking about this, and I think the best way to put it is that imagine a future where most flagships have a 35mm main camera, but they also have equivalently good ultra-wide cameras, because at that point, when you have the higher level of crop, higher level of zoom on the main camera, you might want to use the 23-24mm range with the ultrawide, and if the ultrawide can actually produce good enough results, then the flexibility issue kind of resolves itself. That's just the way I see it. At this point, I would not say that resolve is here, because the X200 Ultra's ultrawide camera is not good enough to the point that it can just give you 23mm shots and it's going to be flawless. It's not the case. We saw more than enough situations here where it just did not work out. So bearing all of that in mind, I would say this is an indication towards a shift to 35mm with various flagships if things actually work out properly. Well, let's hope it does. That's the best way to put it. And well, I'll see you guys sooner with more. And actually, one last thought. Think of the 35mm situation with videography. How would that work? I honestly don't know. I'm gonna have to make a comparison sooner, but it's interesting to think about, isn't it? So, I'll see you guys sooner with more. Cheers.